Imagine a continent that seemed to appear out of nowhere, a land the world forgot for thousands of years, where ancient peoples built cities of gold and Viking warriors fought invisible enemies at the edge of the world. A place where empires rose from ashes and vanished again, leaving only traces on maps and legends in human memory. This is not a myth or a fantasy. It's the story of North America, a young continent that has seen more blood, mystery, and discovery than any ancient civilization. Here, an Italian navigator, convinced he was sailing to India, accidentally opens a new world. Here, greed for gold turns sailors into conquerors and slaves into the builders of empires. Here, French and British armies clash in a deadly struggle over wild, unclaimed lands, and 13 small colonies dare to challenge the greatest power of their age. America buys entire continents, fights itself, bargains for Alaska, and turns chaos into strength. This is a story where every step is a gamble, every deal is fate, and every victory is paid for in blood. You think you know how it all happened? Believe me, the truth is far more incredible. Imagine a frozen world where the earth and sky merge into one endless expanse of ice and wind. It is the end of the last ice age, and massive glaciers still cover the northern lands. At the edge of the world, where Asia meets America, a narrow land bridge lies hidden beneath snow and frost, Beringia. Across it, the first humans are walking. They do not know where this path will lead them. They have no idea that ahead lies a new continent, vast, wild, full of secrets and dangers. They follow herds of mammoths and bison, driven by hunger, instinct, and the sheer will to survive. The cold cuts their skin, the wind howls in their ears, but they keep moving forward, unaware that they are undertaking one of the greatest journeys in human history. These people will become the ancestors of all the nations of the New World. Centuries later, their descendants will spread across the continent, from the icy tundras of Alaska to the scorching jungles of the Yucatan, creating dozens of cultures and languages, building cities that will one day astonish European conquerors. Here, in the heart of America, civilizations are born that rival Egypt and Mesopotamia in grandeur. The Maya build towering step pyramids carved with mathematical precision, as if the stars themselves had whispered the equations to them. Their cities rise from the green depths of the jungle, with sacred fires burning atop their temples, sending prayers to the heavens. In the southern lands of future Peru, the Inca people construct majestic cities in the clouds, high in the Andes, carving roads through mountains and valleys where the echo of ancient songs still lingers. And in the center of the continent rises the empire of the Aztecs, fierce, dazzling, and incomprehensible. They offer human sacrifices to their gods, believing that only blood can keep the sun in the sky. And they build Tenochtitlan, a city so magnificent that it will leave future Europeans speechless, its streets clean, its architecture beyond imagination. America lives its own life, developing in complete isolation from the rest of the world, unaware of Rome, of China, of the pyramids of Giza. To Europe, it is merely a legend, the land beyond the ocean, a myth of faraway shores where golden trees grow and the sun never sets. But America is no myth. It breathes, it grows, it evolves. Its forests and mountains guard secrets unseen by any outsider. On its vast plains, tribes hunt and sing. In its caves, fires burn. And beneath its starry skies, shamans read the destiny of their people. This is a world humanity almost forgot, but it waits patiently for the moment it will be rediscovered. And that moment is near. Very soon, those who call themselves explorers will arrive, unaware that this continent has lived, dreamed, fought, and built long before the first European ship cut through the waters of the Atlantic. America already exists. It is simply waiting to be remembered. Long before the sails of Columbus cut through the waters of the Atlantic, ships with dragon-headed prows ruled the northern seas, and even the ocean seemed to fear them. They were the Vikings, fierce men from the icy lands of Scandinavia, whose swords and spirits knew no fear. Among them was a man destined to be the first European to see the New World, Leif Erikson, son of the legendary Eric the Red, founder of Greenland. In the early 11th century, driven by tales of green shores beyond the horizon, he embarked on a voyage that seemed impossible. His ship crossed the stormy northern waters, where waves towered above the masts and icy winds cut like knives. For weeks they saw nothing but gray skies and endless sea until, at last, through the mist, they glimpsed a land covered with deep forests. It was America, though none of them yet knew that name. The Vikings called it Vinland, the land of wine. There were rivers of pure water, fertile soil, and an abundance of fish. After years of surviving among stone and ice, they believed they had found paradise. They built wooden houses, lit fires, hunted, and explored this strange land where the sun shone differently and the birds sang songs they had never heard before. But paradise was an illusion. They were not alone. From the shadowy depths of the forests came the native people, the Skraelings as the Vikings called them. At first it was peaceful, gifts exchanged, cautious glances, mutual curiosity. But soon curiosity turned into fear. A single misunderstanding became a blood-soaked conflict. The Vikings, warriors by nature, suddenly found themselves trapped in vast forests where their enemies knew every tree, every stone, every whisper of the wind. At night, they heard cries in the darkness, arrows hissed from nowhere. Their camp slowly turned into a besieged fortress. Then came the brutal northern winter. The ships froze to the shore, snow buried everything that had once been green, and the cold gnawed through bone and spirit alike. People fell ill, starved, and despaired. Even the bravest among them began to realize this world did not want them here. Leif Erikson made a painful choice: to abandon Vinland. He gathered the survivors and set sail home, leaving behind nothing but footprints in the snow, soon erased by time. Thus ended the first European colony in America, long before Europe even knew such a land existed. When the Vikings returned, their tales of vast forests and strange people were dismissed as sailors' fantasies, born of storms and mead. For nearly 1,000 years, their story was forgotten, buried in myth. Only in the 20th century did archaeologists uncover the remains of their wooden houses at L'Anse aux Meadows in northern Canada, proving that the legends were true. The story of those who came too early, who challenged the edge of the world, had finally resurfaced. They were the first Europeans to set foot in the New World, 10 centuries before Columbus. And perhaps if fate had been just a little kinder, the history of the entire world would have taken a completely different turn. In that year, when medieval Europe was still ruled by myths and superstition, one man dared to challenge the ocean itself. His name was Christopher Columbus, and he was convinced he had found the shortest route to India. No one believed his reckless dream. Kings dismissed him, priests mocked him, and sailors whispered that beyond the horizon lay an endless abyss. But Columbus would not yield. He trusted not the maps or the stars, but his own obsession. In August of 1492, 3 ships, the Santa Maria, the Pinta, and the Niña, set sail from the Spanish port of Palos. The wind filled their sails as Europe disappeared behind them, a continent still trembling with fear that the earth might simply end in emptiness. Months at sea tested them to the edge of madness. Food ran out, compasses spun wildly, the crew demanded to turn back, yet Columbus stood on deck staring into the darkness, certain that Asia waited just beyond. Then, one night, a faint light flickered on the horizon. By morning, land emerged from the mist. Columbus stepped onto the sandy shore, crossed himself, and claimed this new world for the Spanish crown. He believed he had reached India, but in truth, he had discovered an entire new continent. It was Cuba, a green island surrounded by sapphire blue water, alive with birds, scents, and sounds no European had ever known. The native people greeted the strangers with curiosity, bringing gifts and smiles. To Columbus, they were living proof of his success. He called them Indians and sent word of his triumph back to Spain. When the news reached Europe, it struck like thunder. One man had proven that beyond the horizon there was not a void, but a world. Soon others followed, conquerors, merchants, and missionaries. Thus began an age where gold and faith became inseparable from greed and blood. Ships crossed the ocean carrying swords, crosses, and insatiable ambition. After Columbus came the Spanish conquistadors, who found not India, but treasures beyond imagination, and peoples who had never known war in the European sense. For Europe, it was a triumph. For America, it was the end of an age. From that moment, history would never be the same again. Columbus returned home a hero, unaware that he had become the symbol of a new era, an era of discovery, empire, and conquest, where every ounce of gold was paid for in human lives. His ship sailed into legend, his name became a synonym for victory over the impossible. Yet behind that triumph lay a shadow. He did not know that in discovering a new world, he had destroyed an old one, a world of ancient peoples, gods, songs, and cities. And when Europe rushed across the ocean in his wake, the story of humankind split forever into before and after. Columbus had searched for India, but instead, he found the path that would change the world forever. When the smoke from Columbus's fires had barely faded over the Caribbean, Europe was already losing its mind over one word: America. It was the new El Dorado, a land where rivers were said to flow with gold and cities shimmered under the sun. Spain was the first to leap into this ocean of temptation. Her ships crossed the Atlantic one after another, loaded with soldiers, crosses, and cannons. Conquistadors with faces burned by the sun stormed the palaces of the Aztecs and the Incas, tore down temples, and seized both gold and souls. Where ancient prayers once echoed, now clanged the chains of slaves. The silver mines of Potosi and Mexico became underground hells, where thousands of natives perished for riches beyond even a king's dreams. Gold flowed to Spain, and blood soaked the soil. On these bones, the first global empire was born. But Spain was not alone. France, rising in power each year, set out to create her own world across the ocean. Her ships landed in lands where frost bit the air and endless forests stretched to the horizon. Thus was born New France, majestic, wild, and cold. Here they did not seek gold, they traded in furs. French merchants pushed ever deeper into the continent, forming alliances with native tribes, sometimes even building families with local women. They founded cities, Quebec, Montreal, Louisiana, and dreamed that France would one day rule the New World. Meanwhile, on the eastern coast came the English. Their colonies grew slowly but steadily. 13 settlements stretched along the Atlantic like the roots of a future giant. There was no gold here, but there was something far more valuable: freedom. A chance to begin again, to build a life with one's own hands. Among forests and rivers rose towns, trade, farms, the first universities, and the first dreams of independence. People who had fled Europe's poverty and religious wars were forging a new civilization, harsh but strong. And between them, on the banks of the Hudson River, the Dutch founded a city destined to become the symbol of the New World, New Amsterdam. The air was thick with the scent of spices, furs, and sea salt. Dozens of languages echoed through the streets. Trade thrived. Ships from Europe docked every day. The city was alive, hungry, daring, free. Soon, Britain seized it from the Dutch and gave it a new name, New York. That name would forever mark the beating heart of America, a city of ambition and dreams. While Europe fought over thrones, the ocean became a new battlefield for land, power, and human souls. Colonies multiplied, ships carried both Christian crosses and deadly weapons, and the entire world began to change. The wind from the Atlantic no longer carried the scent of adventure, but the smell of conquest. America was no longer just a new world. It became a mirror of the old, where greed, faith, and the lust for power danced together in a deadly waltz. And it was then that humanity first realized the world had truly become one. Century, the world stood still between fear and greed. The colonies were growing, rivers of gold flowed toward Europe, and every king dreamed that his flag would be the one flying over the new world. But the world was too small for two empires. France and Britain, the superpowers of their time, collided head-on for control of the future. A war began that would decide not just the fate of territories, but who would rule the world itself. Across the endless wilderness of America, smoke rose above the forests, and rivers ran red with blood. French soldiers in blue coats and British troops in scarlet marched into battle through mud, storms, and death. Above them, thunder rolled. Beneath them, the earth shook, and each clash cost thousands of lives. Native tribes took sides, hoping to survive a war that was never theirs, but they often perished first. The clash of empires became a firestorm that consumed both continents and oceans. Ships burned at sea, cannons roared from the Caribbean to Quebec, and even royal palaces in Europe could feel the scent of gunpowder, as if history itself had cornered them. France fought with desperation, Britain with cold calculation. But the war drained them both. Soldiers died not only from bullets but from hunger, frost, and disease. It seemed the continent itself had become a grave for every dream of glory. Year after year, Britain clawed victory from France's hands. Quebec fell after a brutal battle where both commanding generals were killed, as though the gods themselves demanded a sacrifice. The French retreated farther and farther, losing cities and allies. And when the guns finally fell silent, France no longer had a claim to the New World. She ceded Canada and the Great Lakes region to Britain and handed Louisiana to Spain, paying for her ambitions with her empire. Her banners came down, her pride sank into silence. Britain celebrated. Her fleet ruled the seas, her army stood invincible, and Europe watched with envy as the British Empire reached its zenith. But beneath that triumph smoldered a spark. In the 13 colonies along the eastern coast of America, a whisper was turning into a murmur. People who had fought and bled for the empire realized their sacrifices had bought them not freedom, but taxes, restrictions, and chains. Merchants, farmers, and craftsmen began to see that their fate was decided by men an ocean away. Britain had won the war, but lost the loyalty of those who would soon challenge her. France had fallen, but it had planted the seeds of revenge. America remained silent, yet its breath was already stirring in the wind, and that wind carried the scent of revolution. At the end of the 18th century, the world had no idea that on the edge of the Atlantic, a new power was being born, one that would change history forever. 13 British colonies, small settlements scattered along the eastern coast, lived under the rule of an empire that seemed eternal. But beneath the surface of loyalty, discontent was growing. London demanded ever higher taxes, restricted trade, and interfered in the lives of people who had begun to see themselves not as subjects, but as masters of their own destiny. In town, squares and taverns, words that would ignite a revolution echoed: no taxation without representation. Merchants and farmers, priests and lawyers, simple craftsmen and soldiers began to realize they had more in common with each other than with distant lords across the ocean. Their patience broke when British soldiers opened fire on protesters in Boston. The spark became an inferno. In Philadelphia, representatives of the colonies gathered, men whose names would be remembered forever: Jefferson, Adams, Franklin, Washington. They knew they were committing treason, but they also knew history demanded it. In July of 1776, they signed the Declaration of Independence, a document that divided human history into before and after. It declared words that made monarchs tremble: all men are created equal. These words were a direct challenge to the old world, where power came from birth, not justice. America proclaimed that from now on the people would choose their own fate, but words alone were not enough. War followed. The British Army, one of the strongest on earth, descended upon the rebels with ruthless force. Redcoats marched through burning fields, cannons thundered, cities burned. Facing them stood farmers with muskets, volunteers with no uniforms, no training, only faith in freedom. They lost everything: homes, families, friends, but they did not surrender. Their hope was carried by General George Washington, a man whose resolve was forged like steel. He led them through cold defeat and despair, proving that conviction could stand against empires. Each winter was torment, each victory a miracle. But the world began to shift. France, once humiliated by Britain, saw its chance for revenge and joined the fight on the side of the colonies. The ocean became a battlefield where the fate of the world was being written. And at last, after 8 long years, the roar of cannons fell silent. Britain had been defeated. The United States of America was born, the first republic of the New World, founded not on the blood of kings, but on words written in ink and faith in equality. From that moment, history took a new path. People who had once been subjects became citizens. The age of crowns began to tremble. And from that day forward, over the land of America rose a sun of freedom, a light that would never fade. At the dawn of the 19th century, the young United States, still recovering from the War of Independence, stood on the brink of the greatest turning point in its history. The nation was awakening to its own power. Its cities were growing, its people were moving westward, chasing the horizon where, according to rumor, lay endless lands filled with rivers, game, and gold. But between dream and destiny stood France. Louisiana, a vast stretch of territory from the Gulf of Mexico to the frozen edges of Canada, belonged to Napoleon, a man who dreamed of ruling the world. Yet Europe was on fire. War drained France of its strength, and Napoleon realized he could not hold onto America. So he made a decision that would change the map of the world forever. In the spring of 1803, American diplomats arrived in Paris. They expected modest negotiations to buy the city of New Orleans, but the French leader stunned them. With chilling calm, he offered to sell not the city, but all of Louisiana, a landmass that covered nearly a third of the future United States. The price, $15 million. For a young nation with an almost empty treasury, it sounded impossible. But President Thomas Jefferson understood that missing this chance would mean forfeiting America's future. And so, the deal was made. In a single day, the territory of the United States doubled in size. Europe laughed, saying America had bought a wilderness of swamps and prairies. But Americans saw something different. They had bought their destiny. Behind every line on the map lay mountains, tribes, mysteries, and promise. To uncover what the nation had truly purchased, the president commissioned two brave men to embark on a journey unlike any in history. Their names were Meriwether Lewis and William Clark. In May of 1804, they departed from St. Louis, the last outpost of civilization, and ventured into the heart of the continent. Their path led them through wild rivers, dense forests, and vast plains. They encountered dozens of native tribes, some friendly, others hostile. The expedition often teetered on the edge of disaster. They endured weeks without food, lost their horses, and faced deadly cold that split the skin. But they kept moving forward. Among them was a young woman named Sacagawea, a Shoshone who became their guide, interpreter, and symbol of survival. Because of her, the expedition made it through the most dangerous stretches and finally reached the Pacific Ocean. When Lewis and Clark returned 2 years later, America was no longer the same. The continent had opened up, and the gates to the west stood wide. Newspapers declared that the nation grew overnight, and Jefferson was hailed as a visionary. Napoleon gained the funds he needed for his wars, but it was America that won eternity. The Louisiana Purchase was more than the greatest land deal in history. It was the moment the fate of the world shifted. From that day on, America began to believe that its borders were not defined by the ocean, but by the horizon itself. While the young United States greedily pushed westward, on the opposite edge of the continent, across thousands of miles of ocean, another flag was rising over the frozen frontier, the flag of Russia. From the icy expanse of Siberia, Russian explorers had been moving ever eastward, conquering the unknown, until one day their ships reached the cold, untamed shores where the old world ended and the new began. Thus was born Russian America, a northern empire where the seas froze, the winds howled, and furs were worth more than gold. In the early 19th century, these territories stretched from Alaska into parts of Canada, down to California, and even reached the tropical islands of Hawaii. It was the last great expansion of the Russian Empire, not one built on conquest, but on courage, faith, and endurance. Sailors, traders, and Orthodox missionaries brought with them civilization and the cross. They built wooden fortresses and churches, raising shining domes above the cliffs and ringing bells across the wilderness where bears and eagles roamed. Russian merchants and hunters traded with native tribes and American settlers, creating a strange, vibrant blend of cultures at the edge of the world. In quiet bays, ships of the Russian-American company rocked on the icy water, their double-headed eagle flags shimmering under the northern lights. For a time, the colony thrived, but the North demands a high price for survival. The brutal climate, endless distances, food shortages, and conflicts with local tribes turned life into a daily battle. The fiercest of the native peoples were the Tlingit, proud and fearless warriors who refused to bow to foreign rule. Their raids grew bolder, and even the strongholds perched on rocky cliffs began to fall. Meanwhile, far across the ocean, the Russian Empire was faltering. The Crimean War had drained its strength. Europe was entering another age of turmoil, and St. Petersburg saw less and less reason to hold on to these distant frozen lands. The treasury was empty, trade had collapsed, and even furs, once called soft gold, no longer brought the wealth they once had. In the end, Tsar Alexander II, pragmatic and cautious, made a decision that would forever link the two nations. In 1867, Russia agreed to sell Alaska to the United States for $7,200,000. The world was stunned. Some in Europe called it madness, others foresight. For Russia, it was a way to shed a costly burden. For America, it was an opportunity too great to ignore. More than a century later, that sale is remembered as one of the most profitable deals in American history. The land bought for the price of a palace would later yield oil, gold, and immense natural wealth. But beyond riches, the sale of Alaska marked something greater. The moment America truly became a nation stretching from the Atlantic to the Pacific. And though Russia withdrew, it left its spirit behind. On the frozen peaks of Alaska, Orthodox crosses still stand to this day, silent witnesses to the time when two worlds met at the edge of the earth. After the shadow of the Spanish Empire vanished from the map of the world, a new nation was born from its ruins, Mexico. Proud, vast, but fragile. In the early 19th century, it controlled immense lands stretching from the jungles of Yucatan to the deserts of Texas and the golden shores of California. But such vastness invited envy, and a weak government could not defend it. Meanwhile, to the north, the United States was watching, calculating, expanding, and hungering for more. America was growing like a living organism, devouring space. After the Louisiana Purchase and the exploration of the West, a new idea took hold, the manifest destiny, a belief that the nation was fated to rule all land from sea to shining sea. And the first target of this destiny became the plains of Texas. Texas was part of Mexico, but it was already filled with American settlers, men and women who brought their own language, laws, and guns. When Mexican authorities tried to curb their influence, rebellion erupted. A small band of settlers declared independence and faced the might of the Mexican army. The Battle of the Alamo became their legend, a doomed last stand that turned defeat into immortality. Soon after, Texas triumphed, declaring itself a republic, and only a few years later it joined the United States, igniting Mexico's fury. War followed, brutal, bloody, and decisive. American armies under Generals Winfield Scott and Zachary Taylor marched south across deserts and mountains, capturing cities and breaking defenses. Finally, they reached the heart of Mexico, its capital. In September of 1847, the American flag rose over the towers of Mexico City. Victory was absolute. Under the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, Mexico ceded nearly a quarter of its territory to the United States, including California, Nevada, Utah, Arizona, and New Mexico. America's borders now stretched to the Pacific Ocean. The dream of a nation from sea to sea had become reality. For the United States, it was a triumph. The young republic had transformed overnight into a continental power. But triumph carried a shadow. Thousands of soldiers had died, Mexico was left broken, and America, for the first time, saw itself not just as a country, but as an empire. Soon, gold was discovered in California, triggering the legendary gold rush. Tens of thousands of settlers flooded westward, and on the ruins of old Mexican villages, new cities began to rise. The flag of 50 stars did not yet exist, but the nation's stars were already multiplying, expanding across the sky. Thus ended the age of conquest, and began the era of expansion, when America finally stretched from the Atlantic to the Pacific and understood, perhaps for the first time, that it had become a power the entire world would have to reckon with. When the young United States was just beginning to realize its power, a fracture was already forming within, one that threatened to split the nation in two. The South thrived on cotton, wealth, and slave labor. The North on factories, railroads, and the idea of freedom. These two worlds could coexist only so long as no one asked who would define America's future. When Abraham Lincoln became president, the South decided its time had come to an end. One by one, Southern states declared secession, forming their own Confederacy under a new flag, a flag they claimed would defend their way of life. The nation, barely born, had become its own enemy. In April of 1861, the first cannon fire thundered over Fort Sumter, and the Civil War began, the bloodiest conflict in American history. Armies of brothers, neighbors, and former friends clashed across the fields of Virginia, Tennessee, and Pennsylvania. Battlefields turned fertile plains into graveyards. Cannon fire roared for days, smoke blackened the skies, and cities burned to ash. The North fought for the Union and for the belief that all men have a right to freedom. The South fought for independence and the right to live as they chose. But behind every slogan lay the fate of millions of enslaved people, for whom this war was not about politics, but about the first breath of liberty. Lincoln, a man with a humble face and an iron will, saw further than anyone around him. He understood that the North's victory must not only preserve the Union, but redefine the meaning of America itself. In 1863, he issued the Emancipation Proclamation, a document that was not just a law, but a vow to history. From that moment, the war ceased to be merely a struggle for power. It became a battle for the soul of a nation. The battles of Gettysburg, Antietam, and Vicksburg became symbols of courage and agony. Millions perished, hundreds of thousands of families were torn apart. When the war finally ended in 1865, the North had triumphed and slavery was abolished forever. Lincoln declared, "This nation, conceived in liberty, shall not perish from the earth." But the price of freedom was terrible. Half the country lay in ruins, cities were reduced to rubble, and its people were broken in body and spirit. Yet from that ash rose a new America, a nation that now understood the true cost of unity. It emerged scarred but purified, weary but resolute, ready to rise to greatness. The Civil War was more than a chapter in history. It was the trial by fire through which a republic was reborn and a superpower was forged.